Vexa Station was one of those places where you could find just about any species in the known galaxy. The massive trading hub floated in neutral space, where merchants hawked their goods, travelers stopped to refuel, and deals both legal and questionable happened every single day. The air inside smelled like a mixture of 100 different atmospheres, and the constant hum of translation devices created a background noise that never quite went away. In the corner of the main dining hall, pressed against the cold metal wall, sat a small figure that most people pretended not to see. Her name was Lyra and she was dying slowly. She was Calrosian, which meant her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow slightly under the harsh station lights. Her people were carnivores, built lean and quick, with large amber eyes designed for hunting in low light. Those same eyes now tracked every single person who walked past carrying food. She wasn't being rude or aggressive about it. She was just so desperately hungry that she couldn't help herself. Lyra was 14 years old, or at least that's what it would translate to in human years. She'd been on Vexa Station for 3 weeks now, ever since the transport ship had left her behind. Not on purpose, they'd claimed. Just an accident. She'd gone to the bathroom and when she came back the ship was gone. No apology. No message. Just gone. The truth was simpler and crueler. Calrosians weren't welcome anymore. Her homeworld had defaulted on massive interstellar loans, and now her people were banned from most civilized stations. The transport crew had probably gotten a bonus for dumping her here. One less mouth to feed. One less problem to deal with. She had no credits in her account. No family who knew where she was. No way to contact anyone even if she did. Station authorities had already told her twice to move along, but there was nowhere to move to. The charitable shelters wouldn't take Calrosians. The employment offices wouldn't even let her fill out applications. She was invisible except when people wanted to remind her that she didn't belong. The hunger was getting worse. She'd gone without food before, back home during the lean seasons, but this was different. This was watching hundreds of people eat every single day while her stomach cramped and twisted. This was smelling food she couldn't have and feeling her body start to consume itself. A group of the Sien traders sat at a nearby table, their wide mouths working on some kind of roasted meat. Thaxians were big, with thick ridged skin that made them look like walking boulders. They'd noticed Lyra watching them yesterday, and they'd noticed her again today. One of them, the biggest of the group, caught her eye and grinned. He picked up a large piece of meat and waved it in her direction, making exaggerated chewing motions. His friends burst out in harsh, clicking laughter that their translation devices turned into mocking sounds. Lyra looked away quickly, her face burning with shame. But her eyes betrayed her, drifting back to the food despite her best efforts. This only encouraged them. Another the Sien joined in, holding food just above his plate and then pulling it back dramatically every time he pretended to drop it. They were performing now and other species were starting to notice. A few even laughed along. Someone tossed a scrap of food onto the floor near Lyra's feet. It landed with a wet smack against the metal. The message was clear. If you're that hungry, eat like the animal you are. Lyra didn't move. She kept her eyes down, willing herself to become even smaller, more invisible. Tears threatened to spill, but she forced them back. Crying would only make it worse. It always did. Station security stood less than 20 meters away, 2 armed guards in their crisp uniforms. They saw everything. They always did. But they didn't move. Didn't intervene. As far as they were concerned, this wasn't their problem. Lyra had no advocate, no rights, no recourse. She was nobody's responsibility. The laughter grew louder. More aliens were gathering now, drawn by the spectacle. It wasn't every day you got free entertainment with your meal. Lyra closed her amber eyes and tried to remember what her mother's voice sounded like. It had only been a few months, but already the memory was fading. She wondered if this was how it would end, starving in a corner while strangers laughed. Across the dining hall, at a small table wedged between a support beam and a waste disposal unit, sat a human. His name was Jake and he'd been working maintenance on Vexa Station for about 8 months now. He was eating something that barely qualified as food, the standard station rations that tasted like cardboard mixed with synthetic protein. He'd been watching the Thaxians for the past 5 minutes. His jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. His knuckles had gone white around his fork. Jake had seen a lot of awful things working on stations like this. The galaxy was a big place and not all of it was kind. Different species had different values, different ideas about what was acceptable. He usually tried to mind his business, do his job, and stay out of trouble. But this was a kid. A terrified, starving kid being tortured for entertainment. He looked down at his meal, barely touched. Then back at Lyra, huddled against the wall like she was trying to disappear into it. Jake pushed his chair back. The screech of metal on metal cut through the laughter. He stood up, all 6 feet of him, his maintenance jumpsuit stained with the day's work. He started walking toward the Calrosian girl, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. The dining hall began to quiet. Humans were still new enough to this sector that their presence commanded attention. Their reputation had spread quickly. Unpredictable, people said. Dangerous when angry. Emotional to the point of irrationality. Jake didn't care what they said. He just kept walking toward that little blue girl who reminded him of his niece back on Earth. Jake's boots made steady, deliberate thuds against the metal floor of the dining hall. Every step brought a deeper quiet to the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks stopped moving. Even the constant background hum of translation devices seemed to fade as hundreds of eyes turned to watch the human cross the room. The Thaxians noticed him coming. The big one, the ringleader who'd been waving food at Lyra, straightened up in his seat. His ridge-covered face shifted into something between amusement and caution. Humans were still a mystery to most of the galaxy. They'd only been part of the interstellar community for about 15 years, and in that time, they'd earned a reputation that made other species nervous. Emotional. That's what everyone said about them. Dangerously emotional. Most species had evolved past such things, or so they claimed. They made decisions based on logic, efficiency, profit margins. Humans made decisions based on feelings, and that made them unpredictable. Jake stopped directly in front of Lyra. She looked up at him with those huge amber eyes, wide with fear. She probably thought he was going to hurt her or tell her to leave like everyone else did. Her thin body pressed harder against the wall, as if she could somehow phase through it and escape. Jake's voice was gentle, almost soft. Hey, you hungry? Lyra didn't respond. She just stared at him like he was speaking a language her translator couldn't process. Come eat with me, Jake said, extending his hand toward her. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then the big Thasian laughed, a harsh barking sound. Human, you don't know what you're doing. Stay out of this. Jake didn't even look at him. He kept his hand extended toward Lyra, kept his eyes on her frightened face. It's okay, he said quietly. I'm not gonna hurt you. Just want to share some food. That's all. The Thasian stood up now, his massive frame towering over most of the nearby tables. The creature has no credits. No registration. No rights on this station. What you're proposing violates protocol. Now Jake turned to face him. His expression was calm, almost pleasant, but something in his eyes made the Thasian take a half step back. Really? That's interesting. Which specific protocol says I can't share my own food that I bought with my own credits with whoever I choose? The Thaxian's mouth opened, then closed. He looked to his companions for support. One of them started to speak but stopped when Jake's gaze shifted to him. Because I read the station regulations pretty carefully when I started working here, Jake continued, his tone still conversational. I'm kind of a stickler for rules, you know? And I don't remember seeing anything about sharing food being illegal. But maybe I missed something. You want to pull up the specific regulation number for me? The silence stretched out. The Thaxian's translator clicked and whirred as it processed sounds he wasn't making. Finally, he sat back down, muttering something in his native language that the translator wisely didn't translate. Jake turned back to Lyra. His expression softened immediately. Come on, kid. Let's go. He kept his hand extended, patient and steady. Lyra stared at it like it might be a trap. She'd learned the hard way that kindness was usually just cruelty wearing a different mask. But something in the human's face, something in his eyes, looked genuine. Her hand was shaking when she reached out. Her thin blue fingers looked tiny wrapped in Jake's calloused palm. He helped her to her feet gently, and she swayed slightly from weakness. Jake steadied her with his other hand. Easy. When's the last time you ate? 6 days, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake's jaw tightened, but his touch remained gentle. Okay, we're gonna fix that right now. He led her across the dining hall to his small table in the corner. Every eye in the room followed them. Some looked curious. Some looked disapproving. A few looked angry. Jake ignored all of them. He pulled out a chair for Lyra and waited until she sat before taking his own seat. His meal was still there, barely touched. Some kind of synthetic protein with reconstituted vegetables and a starch that might have been related to rice in some distant way. It wasn't good, but it was food and it was enough. Jake picked up his tray and looked at it for a moment. Then he grabbed his knife and cut everything exactly in half, right down the middle. He pushed the larger portion across the table to Lyra. Eat slow, he said. Your stomach's gonna be sensitive after going without for so long. Small bites, okay? Don't want you getting sick. Lyra stared at the food in front of her. Her hands trembled as they hovered over the tray. She looked up at Jake, searching his face for the catch, for the trick, for the moment when he'd laugh and pull it away. Jake just nodded toward the food. Go ahead. It's yours. She picked up the fork with shaking hands. The first bite was tiny, cautious. Then another. Then the dam broke and tears started streaming down her blue face as she ate. She tried to eat slowly like Jake had said, but her body was screaming for nutrition. Hey, slow down, Jake said gently. I know you're hungry, but you gotta pace yourself. The food's not going anywhere. I promise. Lyra forced herself to slow down, taking smaller bites, chewing more carefully. The tears kept coming though. She couldn't stop them. Thank you, she whispered between bites. Thank you. I don't understand. Why? Jake shrugged. You were hungry. I had food. Seemed pretty simple to me. But I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I can't pay you back. Don't want you to pay me back. Just want you to eat. Around them, the dining hall slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. People went back to their meals. But not everyone stopped watching. Some kept glancing over at the human and the Calrosian girl, this strange scene that didn't make sense to them. The big Decian was still staring, his expression unreadable. A Vrelian merchant at a nearby table had stopped eating entirely, watching Jake and Lyra with large, thoughtful eyes. Jake didn't notice any of them. He was too busy making sure Lyra didn't eat too fast and making her drink water between bites. He told her stupid jokes about his work on the station, trying to get her to relax. Most of them weren't funny, but Lyra smiled anyway. For the first time in 3 weeks, the gnawing emptiness in her stomach began to fade. And for the first time since being abandoned, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Oh. When the meal was finished, Jake stood up. Same time tomorrow. I'll bring extra. You'll be here? Lyra nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good. Get some rest if you can find a spot. Tomorrow we'll figure out something better than station floors. He walked away, leaving Lyra sitting at the table, staring at the empty tray in front of her. Around the dining hall, dozens of species whispered to each other, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. The human had gained nothing from his actions. No profit. No advantage. No logical benefit whatsoever. He just helped because someone needed help. And that single act was about to change everything. The next day, Lyra was waiting in the same spot an hour before Jake usually showed up. She couldn't help it. The fear that yesterday had been a dream or worse, a one-time act of pity, kept her awake most of the night. She'd found a quiet corner in one of the lower maintenance corridors to sleep, curled up behind some supply crates where security wouldn't bother her. When Jake finally walked into the dining hall carrying 2 meal trays, Lyra's entire body sagged with relief. He spotted her immediately and smiled, heading straight to the same corner table. Sorry I'm a few minutes late, Jake said, setting both trays down. Had to fix a coolant leak in Section 7. You been waiting long? Lyra shook her head quickly. No. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss you. I told you I'd be here. Jake pushed one of the trays toward her. A promise is a promise. They ate together, and this time Lyra managed to pace herself better. Her stomach had stopped cramping quite so badly, and the desperate edge of starvation had dulled to simple hunger. Jake talked about his work, complaining good-naturedly about faulty wiring and stubborn cargo bay doors. He didn't ask Lyra about her past or how she'd ended up alone on the station. He just treated her like a person worth having lunch with. On the 3rd day something changed. Jake arrived with the usual 2 trays, but he wasn't alone. A human woman walked beside him, carrying her own meal. She was maybe in her 30s, with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and grease stains on her work uniform. Lyra tensed immediately, old instincts flaring up. Groups were more dangerous than individuals. Groups laughed and pointed and made games out of cruelty. But Jake's voice was reassuring. Lyra, this is Beth. She works engineering on the station. Beth, this is Lyra. Beth sat down without ceremony and stuck out her hand for Lyra to shake. When Lyra hesitantly took it, Beth's grip was firm but friendly. Nice to meet you. Jake won't shut up about you. Kept telling everyone in maintenance about the kid he's been having lunch with. I didn't tell everyone, Jake protested. Just a few people. Sure. Beth turned back to Lyra with a grin. So, how bad is the food? Jake says it's terrible, but I think he's just spoiled. Back on Earth, I ate way worse than this. Lyra wasn't sure how to respond. It's good. Better than nothing. That's the spirit. Low standards make everything easier. Beth started eating, then launched into a story about a power conduit that had exploded yesterday, covering 3 engineers in fluorescent coolant that wouldn't wash off. She made it funny, acting out the parts and doing impressions of her supervisor's reaction. Despite herself, Lyra laughed. Actually laughed. The sound felt strange coming from her throat. By the end of the week, there were 5 humans at the table. Beth had come back every day and she'd brought others. A medical technician named Tom who worked in the station's clinic. A woman named Lisa who handled cargo logistics. A young systems analyst named Kevin who couldn't have been much older than 20. They didn't make it a big production. Didn't give speeches or draw attention to themselves. They just showed up at lunch, brought their food, and included Lyra in their conversations like it was the most natural thing in the world. They taught her English slang that made no sense but was fun to say. They shared stories about Earth, a planet Lyra had only heard about in passing. Tom, the medical tech, casually asked Lyra about Calrosian dietary needs and then started bringing supplements that would help her recover faster. Just stuff we have extra of in the clinic, he said with a shrug when Lyra tried to thank him. Lisa showed her how to play a card game that involved lying convincingly, and laughed when Lyra turned out to be terrible at it. Your face gives everything away, Lisa said. It's actually kind of refreshing. Most people out here lie so well you can't tell truth from fiction. Kevin helped Lyra set up a basic station account that would let her access the public networks and message systems. Everyone should be able to communicate, he said. It's a basic right, not a privilege. Other people in the dining hall noticed. How could they not? The humans had essentially adopted this Calrosian refugee that everyone else had been content to ignore. Some of the other species whispered among themselves, trying to understand the logic. What were the humans gaining? What was their angle? The big Thesian who'd mocked Lyra that first day watched from his usual table. His name was Gren, though Lyra didn't know that. He came to the dining hall every day, and every day he watched the humans gather around the Calrosian girl. His expression was hard to read, but he'd stopped laughing. That was something. On the 8th day, something unexpected happened. Lyra arrived at the dining hall early as usual, heading for the corner where she'd been sleeping. But there was something there that hadn't been before. A packaged meal, still sealed and warm, sitting exactly where she usually curled up at night. There was no note. No indication of who'd left it. Lyra looked around the dining hall, trying to figure out who her mystery benefactor was. Her eyes landed on a Vrelian merchant sitting alone at a far table. The moment their eyes met, the Vrelian quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in his own meal. Vrelians were small, delicate creatures with crystalline skin that refracted light in strange ways. They were traders mostly, known for being shrewd but fair. This particular Vrelian had been in the dining hall that first day when the Thaxians had mocked her. Lyra remembered seeing him look away uncomfortably. She picked up the packaged meal carefully, almost reverently. It was protein paste, not great, but it was food. Food that someone had left for her. Someone who wasn't human. When Jake and the others arrived for lunch, Lyra showed them the package. Someone left this for me, she said, her voice full of wonder. I don't know who. Jake smiled. People are watching, Lyra. They're seeing that you're not just some problem to be ignored. You're a person. But why would they care now? Nothing's changed. I'm still Calrosian. Still banned from most places. Beth leaned forward. Everything's changed. They're seeing that treating you like you don't matter says something about them, not about you. Nobody wants to be the villain in someone else's story. Over the following days, more small acts of kindness appeared. Someone left a worn but clean blanket near Lyra's sleeping spot. A docking supervisor who'd previously ignored her started nodding in acknowledgement when they passed in the corridors. A food vendor, accidentally, made too much and offered Lyra the extra at no charge. The shift was subtle but real. The humans hadn't just helped Lyra. They'd held up a mirror to the rest of the station and forced everyone to see what they'd been doing, or more accurately, what they'd been failing to do. But not everyone was happy about it. Station Administrator Cal watched all of this unfold from his office high above the main concourse. His 4 eyes tracked the group of humans through the security feeds, watched them laugh and share meals with the Calrosian girl. He drummed his long fingers against his desk, a nervous habit his mates always complained about. The Thesian Merchant Guild had filed formal complaints. 3 of them. They claimed the humans were disrupting station harmony, interfering with established social orders, and creating dangerous precedents. Kel knew he'd have to do something. The question was what? He pressed a button on his console. Send a message to the human Jake. Tell him I need to see him in my office tomorrow morning. His assistant acknowledged the order and the screen went dark. Kel sat back in his chair and wondered when his job had gotten so complicated. It used to be simple. Keep the station running, keep the merchants happy, keep the credits flowing. But humans had a way of making simple things complicated. They had a way of asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Jake received the summons from Administrator Kel late in the evening, just as he was finishing up a repair job on one of the water recycling systems. The message was formal and cold, the way official communications always were. Report to the administrator's office at 0800 hours. No explanation. No context. Just an order. He wasn't surprised. He'd been expecting something like this ever since the group of humans eating with Lyra had grown from 5 to nearly a dozen. When you disrupted the status quo, the people who benefited from that status quo eventually pushed back. Jake showed up at Kel's office exactly on time. The administrator's workspace was impressive in that sterile, bureaucratic way. Everything was perfectly organized, perfectly clean, perfectly designed to remind visitors that the person behind the desk held power over their lives. Kel himself was Zentari, a species known for their administrative efficiency and emotional detachment. He had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern on his elongated face, and his skin had a slight purple tint that deepened when he was stressed. Right now it was pretty dark. "Mr. Jake," Kel said, gesturing to a chair that was slightly too small for human proportions. "Thank you for coming." "Didn't really feel like I had a choice," Jake said, sitting down anyway. "You always have choices. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you." Kel pulled up several screens on his desk display. "I've been monitoring the situation with the Calrosian child. Her name is Lyra." "Yes, Lyra." Kel's upper 2 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of mild irritation. "The Visien Merchant Guild has filed multiple complaints about you and your fellow humans. They claim you're disrupting station operations and creating an uncomfortable environment for their members." Jake leaned back in the too small chair. "Uncomfortable how?" "By sharing our lunch. By interfering in matters that don't concern you. By showing preference to an individual who has no legal standing on this station. By, and I'm quoting directly here, weaponizing compassion to make other species appear cruel by comparison." Weaponizing compassion. Jake let the words hang in the air for a moment. "That's a new one. So feeding a starving kid is now an act of aggression." Kel's skin darkened another shade. "You're being deliberately obtuse. You know exactly what they mean. Your actions make other species look bad. They've created a social pressure that many find manipulative." "Good." The single word seemed to catch Kel off guard. His 4 eyes all focused on Jake at once. "Good?" "Yeah, good. People feel bad about watching a kid starve, maybe they should feel bad. That's called a conscience. Most species claim to have one. This is exactly the kind of emotional reasoning that makes humans so difficult to work with," Kel said, his translator adding an edge of frustration to his words. "You don't understand the complexities of interstellar relations. The Calrosian government defaulted on enormous debts. Their people are banned from most stations for legitimate economic and political reasons. Lyra's 14 years old. What debts did she personally default on?" "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." Jake leaned forward now, his voice calm but firm. "You're telling me that a kid should starve because of what her government did? That she should be punished for decisions made by politicians she's never met? Does that sound fair to you?" Kel was quiet for a moment. His fingers drummed against his desk, that nervous habit he couldn't quite break. "Fair is a human concept. The galaxy doesn't operate on fairness. It operates on agreements, contracts, and consequences." "Then maybe the galaxy's got it wrong." "You can't possibly believe that." "I absolutely believe that. Any system that requires a kid to starve to function is a broken system. Period." Kel stood up and walked to the window overlooking the station's main concourse. From this height, the people below looked like insects scurrying about their business. "You're naive, Mr. Jake. Dangerously naive. Do you know what happens when you help one refugee? 10 more show up. Then 100. Then 1,000. Where does it end? With everyone being fed, hopefully. And who pays for that? Who bears the burden? This station operates on thin margins as it is." Jake stood up too, walking over to stand beside Kel at the window. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kel's eyes swiveled to look at him suspiciously. "That depends on the question." "You got kids?" The administrator was silent for several seconds. Then quietly, "I have 3 offspring. 2 sons and a daughter." "How old?" "My youngest is 7 in your years. My oldest is 16. Jake nodded, looking out at the station below. "Okay. So imagine one of them got stranded somewhere. Imagine they were alone and scared and hungry, and everyone who passed by just ignored them. Everyone just said, 'Not my problem,' and kept walking. How would that make you feel?" Kel's purple skin had gone very pale. That's not a fair comparison. Why not? Because your kids are Zentari and Lyra's Calrosian? Because your government pays its debts and hers doesn't? What's the actual difference that makes your kids deserve help and she doesn't? My children wouldn't. Kel stopped himself, his translator clicking softly as he struggled to find words. It's different. It's not different. Not where it matters. Jake turned to face the administrator directly. Look, I get it. You've got a station to run. You've got rules and regulations and political pressures. I'm not saying that stuff doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to look at yourself and know you're not the kind of person who lets kids starve. And what happens when word spreads? When every refugee in the sector heads here looking for human compassion. Then we figure it out. Together. We find solutions. That's what intelligent species are supposed to do, right? Solve problems? Jake moved toward the door. Is that all, Administrator? I've got work to do. Kel didn't respond immediately. He just stood at his window staring down at the concourse below. Finally he spoke. The Thaxians want her removed from the station. They're threatening to pull their contracts if something isn't done. Jake's hand froze on the door handle. And I'm considering it. It would solve a lot of problems. It would also be wrong. Wrong is another human concept that has limited application in interstellar politics. Jake turned back to face Kel one more time. You know what I think? I think you already know it's wrong. That's why you called me up here. You wanted me to give you permission to do the easy thing, to tell you that I understand and it's not your fault. But I can't do that. Because it is your fault if you make that choice. He opened the door and walked out, leaving Kel alone in his office. That evening, the humans gathered in the dining hall as usual. But this time there were even more of them. Word had spread through the human workers on the station that Jake had been called to the administrator's office. It had become about more than just Lyra now. It was about what kind of people they were. What kind of community they wanted to build. 23 humans crowded around and near Lyra's table that night. They brought food and stories and laughter. They taught Lyra a human card game called poker and laughed when she won 3 hands in a row with her terrible poker face. From his office high above, Administrator Kel watched the security feeds. He watched the humans gather. Watched them share their meals. Watched them treat the Calrosian girl like she was one of their own. And for the first time in his long career, Kel wondered if maybe the humans understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. His youngest daughter's face flashed in his mind. 7 years old, with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. What would he want someone to do if she was alone and afraid? The answer was obvious. He'd want someone to help her. Anyone. It wouldn't matter what species they were or what political complications it created. He'd just want someone to care. Kel turned off the security feeds and sat in the darkness, thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between doing what was easy and doing what was right. 3 months passed, and Vexa Station settled into a new normal that nobody had quite expected. Lyra wasn't sleeping in maintenance corridors anymore. Tom, the medical technician, had pulled some strings and gotten her a small quarters in the station's residential section. It was tiny, barely more than a closet with a bed, but it was hers. She had a door that locked. A place where she could feel safe. Beth had helped her get clothes that actually fit instead of the torn and stained outfit she'd been wearing when Jake first found her. Lisa had taught her how to use the station's job boards and helped her fill out applications even though most species wouldn't hire a Calrosian. And Jake still met her for lunch every single day. It had become their thing. Sometimes others joined them, sometimes it was just the two of them, but Jake never missed a day. Not once. Lyra had gained weight. Her blue skin had lost that grayish tinge that came from malnutrition. Her amber eyes were brighter, more alert. She smiled now, laughed at jokes, participated in conversations instead of just sitting silently. She was learning English rapidly and could curse in 3 other languages thanks to some questionable teaching from the cargo dock workers. She'd even found work, though it had taken time. The station's head of hydroponics, an elderly human woman named Dorothy, had hired Lyra to help tend the gardens that provided fresh food for the station's residents. It didn't pay much, but it was honest work and Lyra loved it. There was something calming about working with growing things, about helping create life instead of just surviving. The dining hall had changed too. The humans still gathered there most days, but now they weren't alone. A few Vrelians had started joining them. Some of the younger aliens from other species would sit at nearby tables, listening to the conversations. The big Thasian named Gren hadn't joined them, but he'd stopped glaring. That was progress. Administrator Kel had never followed through on his threat to remove Lyra from the station. He'd never explained why. Just stopped responding to the Thasian complaints and let the matter drop. Jake had seen him in the corridors once, and they'd exchanged a nod. Nothing more. But it was enough. Everything seemed stable. Peaceful even. Then the Calrosian ship arrived. It came without warning, a sleek diplomatic vessel that docked in the premium bay reserved for government officials. The arrival sent ripples of tension through the station. Calrosian ships were rare in this sector, and they usually meant trouble. Jake was working on a faulty airlock seal when he got the message from Lyra. Her text was short and panicked. Calrosian ship here. They're asking about me. I'm scared. He dropped his tools and ran. By the time Jake reached the docking bay, there was already a crowd. Station security had formed a perimeter, and Administrator Cal was there personally, which meant this was serious. A group of Calrosians in formal diplomatic attire stood near their ship, and in the center of them was Lyra, looking tiny and terrified. Jake pushed through the crowd. Lyra. She turned at the sound of his voice, and her face transformed with relief. Jake. One of the Calrosians, a tall woman with ceremonial markings on her face, stepped between them. Her translator rendered her voice as cold and formal. You are the human who has been harboring this child? Harboring? I've been helping her. There's a difference. We received reports of a stranded Calrosian youth on this station. We've come to retrieve her and return her to her family. Lyra grabbed Jake's arm. I don't have family. They died in the food riots 2 years ago. That's why I was on that transport. I was going to a refugee camp. The tall Calrosian's expression softened slightly. We are aware of your circumstances. The camp has been established. You'll be taken there and cared for. She's being cared for here, Jake said firmly. By aliens? By humans who don't understand our culture or our needs. The woman shook her head. It's inappropriate. She belongs with her own kind. Her own kind abandoned her here to die. The words hung in the air like an accusation. The tall Calrosian's face tightened, but she didn't deny it. That was an unfortunate error. It's being investigated. An error. Jake's voice was flat. That's what you're calling it. Administrator Cal stepped forward, trying to mediate. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. There's no need for... I want to stay, Lyra said suddenly. Her voice was quiet but clear. I want to stay here. On this station. With Jake and Beth and Tom and the others. The tall Calrosian looked genuinely surprised. Child, you don't understand. These humans, they're not your people. You can't build a life here. Why not? I already have. Lyra pulled away from Jake and stood on her own, facing the Calrosian diplomats. I have a job. I have friends. I have a place to sleep and food to eat and people who care if I'm okay. What does the refugee camp have? Safety. Structure. Others of your own species. And will they share their lunch with me every day? Will they help me learn new languages and teach me card games and make sure I'm not scared at night? Lyra's voice cracked slightly. Will they notice if I disappear? The Calrosian diplomat didn't have an answer for that. Another Calrosian stepped forward, an older male with gray streaks in his hair. His voice was gentler. May I speak with you privately, child? Just for a moment? Lyra looked at Jake, who nodded. I'll be right here. She followed the older Calrosian a short distance away. They spoke in their native language, their voices too low for the translators to pick up. Jake watched, tension coiling in his shoulders. Beth had arrived now, along with Tom and Lisa and a dozen other humans. They formed a loose group behind Jake, silent support. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then Lyra and the older Calrosian returned to the group. The tall female diplomat looked at Lyra expectantly. Well? I'm staying, Lyra said. Ambassador Ven says I can choose and I choose to stay. The ambassador, the older male, nodded slowly. The child is old enough to make her own decisions under our law. And after hearing what she's told me, I believe this is the right choice. He turned to Jake. I need to speak with you. They moved to a quieter corner of the docking bay. Ven studied Jake with intelligent, tired eyes. I don't understand you, human. You had nothing to gain from helping her. By all accounts, you may have made enemies. Why did you do it? Jake had been asked this question so many times over the past 3 months that he'd stopped trying to find new answers. Because she needed help and I could help. That's enough. But she's not your species. Not your responsibility. She's a kid. That makes her everyone's responsibility. Ven was quiet for a long moment. We've been hearing stories about humans. About your emotional nature, your unpredictability, your strange values. I thought they were exaggerations. I'm beginning to think they were understatements. Is that a compliment or an insult? I'm not sure yet. Ven glanced back at Lyra, who was surrounded by humans now, all of them clearly relieved. We failed her. My people, my government. We abandoned her because it was easier than helping. That shames me more than I can express. Then don't let it happen again, Jake said simply. You've got power. Use it to change things. And what will you do, human Jake? Will you continue to collect strays? To fight battles that aren't yours? Jake smiled slightly. If I have to, yeah. Someone's got to. Ven extended his hand in the human custom he'd obviously researched. Jake shook it. The galaxy is changing, Ven said quietly. Humans are changing it whether the rest of us are ready or not. I think perhaps we need that change. The Calrosian diplomatic team left an hour later. Before boarding, Ven gave Lyra an official document that granted her protected refugee status and a monthly stipend from the Calrosian government. You're not forgotten, he told her. And what happened to you will not happen to others. I promise you that. After they were gone, the crowd dispersed. Life on Vexa Station returned to normal, or what passed for normal these days. That evening, Jake and Lyra sat in the dining hall at their usual table. Just the two of them this time. I was scared you wouldn't let me stay, Lyra said quietly. Wasn't my choice to make. It was yours. But you would have fought for me if I wanted to stay, right? Jake smiled. Absolutely. Though I think you did a pretty good job fighting for yourself. Lyra pushed her food around on her plate, thinking. Finally she asked the question she'd been holding back for 3 months. Jake, why did you do it? That very first day? I've never understood. You didn't know me. I couldn't help you. Why? Jake set down his fork and looked at her directly. You really want to know? She nodded. Because doing nothing when you can help someone, that changes who you are. It makes you smaller, meaner, colder. And I didn't want to be the kind of person who could walk past a scared, hungry kid and pretend I didn't see her. He paused. Plus, you reminded me of my niece back on Earth. She's got the same stubborn look in her eyes that you do. Lyra smiled through sudden tears. I'm glad you didn't walk past. Me too, kid. Me too. Word of what happened on Vexa Station spread through the sector slowly but steadily. The story changed slightly with each telling, gained embellishments and lost details, but the core remained the same. Humans had helped when no one else would. They'd shared their food, their time, their compassion with someone who had no claim to any of it. It was a small thing really. One girl on one station. But small things have a way of echoing. On stations throughout the sector, people started looking twice at the refugees they usually ignored. Started questioning the systems that made it acceptable to let people starve. Started asking themselves what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. The humans hadn't set out to change anything. They just refused to accept that cruelty was inevitable. And sometimes that's exactly how change begins.